All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time to dive deeper into the wisdom of David R. Hawkins. Classic teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment, but more importantly, trying to expand and increase our awareness of not only ourselves, psychology, our minds, philosophy, our spirituality, and our awareness of the nature of reality, so that hopefully through that understanding and increased awareness, we can increase the quality of our lives. And so today we will be going back into towards the beginning, because previously we finished the bonus material of the valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker that came to us from David R. Hawkins. And now we will be going into the duality of the ego. A very interesting subject. When the ego comes up, it's always a deep topic, as well as when duality comes up. And so combining both of these should lead us down quite a rabbit hole today, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for being here. And without any further ado, let's dive right into duality and the ego and see what we can learn today. This discovery, David Hawkins begins, led to my eventually becoming a spiritual teacher. Now he's referring to the discovery of the map of consciousness, putting man now in a new quote unquote dimension. And previously, when we read this, he was talking about at the point of 207, the level of consciousness calibrated for humanity is critical because it only takes one feather to tip the balance from negative to positive. Every spiritual decision we make can tip the scale to the positive side. This is what we talked about, I believe, a couple weeks ago. And so, with that being said, it's what we're here confronted with instant by instant. And we're constantly saying yes or no to choices, and these choices that determine our spiritual level, or the quote unquote calibrated level of consciousness through applied kinesiology, which is a science. And this can totally influence or affect our destiny, as David R. Hawkins put it. So, back to where we are now. This discovery led to his eventually becoming a spiritual teacher. He wanted to share his own subjective state and things that have never really been said before. What I teach, David Hawkins says, I call devotional non-duality, which I personally find is a very interesting term. A devotion, or, a lifestyle, a commitment to living a non-dual life. And that's been talked about a lot before in Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, Living the Wisdom of the Tao, that we refer to often, usually on Tuesdays here, as well as the Wisdom of the Ages. And we have a series on this channel for both of those books as well, which was fantastic and fun. So hopefully you check those out if you haven't already. And so, non-duality, devotional non-duality. David Hawkins continues, devotional because one is in love with the truth. Now, if you're here, you're listening to this, then you are probably one of those. And we are the few percentage, ladies and gentlemen, slowly increasing, hopefully. But give yourself a pat on the back if you are here seeking to discover the wisdom of the ages. And so devotional because one is in love with the truth. One is in love with the pathway to quote unquote God, grand organized design, great spirit, the Tao, Atum, God. Through this attainment or search for the truth, a greater awareness and understanding, as I put it, and as Hermes or Thoth, the Egyptian sage god, put it, to attain the knowledge of the things that are. And so, non-duality, meaning that to reach a state of enlightenment, one has to transcend the ego. The ego is dualistic in nature, so it has two sides. Human thinking is also dualistic in nature. There's an either or, this or that. The spiritual student is usually confronted. It starts first with confronting the ego and what has traditionally been called sin in religious traditions, and given all kinds of other bad names depending on your foundational spiritual philosophy. But as we've seen in our research on Wednesdays and throughout researching the Tao Te Ching and the wisdom of the ages, that this underlying essence that is throughout all spiritual traditions, throughout all of history and across all cultures, that usually seems to be referred to as God, but it's all connected. Even though we all have different perspectives, this thing is there. And so it also starts first with confronting the ego, which has traditionally been referred to as sin, or many other names in many other traditions, and given all kinds of bad names. Quote, back to the book now, the first thing I wanted my students, David Hawkins says, to understand is the nature of the ego and to become friendly with it. A lot of people will talk about trying to destroy the ego or eliminating the ego and ego death and all of these things, and that can be very dangerous if you are not, well on the path and prepared for that kind of process. Because I'll continue, you have to become friendly with it and understand where it comes from. The ego makes a terrible master, but an excellent servant. And that's the quote that I always think of. I forget where that comes from. If you know, leave that in the comments below, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you're getting value. If you are, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for being here. And this concept of the ego is very important for our spiritual process, for our increased understanding of spiritual philosophy, and for ourselves, because it allows us to experience much more bliss, freedom, harmony, and feel a greater connection to that mystical force, God, or the universe, or nature. Once again, I like to throw out a bunch of names for it because the names are not it, but it is all things. So you could really give it any name, but that's a different book, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the ego, on the other hand, is very interesting because you can't see it as an enemy. The ego is nothing but the animal survival nature instincts that we have. And so when we see it as an animal, we just say, okay, it's nature. But when we see it in a human, we say, oh, isn't that awful? The ego type of traits and characteristics that are displayed that are most often negative that we see and experience in life and in the world. But no, it's actually nature. With evolution, we see the emergence, David Hawkins continues, of the mammalian brain from the reptilian brain. Now, this is very important if you haven't heard this before. I mean, if you're here, you probably have, but if you haven't, pay attention here. With evolution, so evolutionary biology, we see the emergence of the mammalian brain from the reptilian brain, and for the first time, we see the emergence of love. Love didn't emerge on this planet for millions of years. Now, if you want to debate this, then that's perfectly fine. This is why we're here, for open thought. But remember, don't keep your mind so open that your brain falls out on the ground. Shout out to Rex, actually. Leak Con shirt here. So the first time love emerges was not until the mammalian brain. When we see a mother bird caring for her eggs and baby birds, it's really the mammalian brain that we begin to see. So we don't see love until we see really the emergence of the maternal instinct. Love doesn't appear until we see the mother's concern for the child, the infant, the fledgling, and we don't see it arising primarily early in the evolution of the animal world. Now, you might be saying, what does this have to do with spiritual philosophy, duality, and the ego? Well, love begins to emerge as the expression of the maternal. Then you begin to see love blossoms over the ages. Romantic love, which we take for granted in today's world, is a rather recent occurrence. For many centuries, David Hawkins says, people didn't get married for romantic love. It was a transfer of power. They got married because the family arranged it. The kings, the queens of England, for all their power, weren't free to choose love. They figured marriage is one thing, love is another thing. So romantic love, as we see it, is a rather recent and modern thing. Now, why are you telling us this, Dr. David Hawkins? When people go into the spiritual world and into spiritual work in their lives, they're always concerned about overcoming the ego. So first we say recontextualize it as the residual of the animal within us. The old animal brain is still present in the back of our current consciousness, and the prefrontal cortex is a rather recent emergence. Now, if you calibrate the level of consciousness of hominids as they evolved over time, you see Cro-Magnon, you see Neanderthal, and Neanderthal calibrates around 75 on the map, a really animalistic level. Although it's able to speak and talk, it's still pretty much an animal. It's only with the emergence of the forebrain and the prefrontal cortex that you begin to see ethics, morality, and more importantly, spiritual awareness, and so on. And so what humans are trying to do then is transcend what we are trying to do and what we should be trying to do through our ability to use our minds in the wonderful way that we can. So many of us don't, which is odd, to seek to discover this way that we can transcend our original, animal nature, transcending domination by our previous animalistic survival programming and instincts, which is like, take what I need and get as much as I can and hoard it, and all of these things that would be opposite to oneness and harmony. And so, however, you can see though that it's a very necessary tool when trying to proliferate a species over thousands of years. So, with that being said, what we are trying to do now in the position that we have is to transcend our subconscious domination by these animal instincts, i.e., the ego. So, if it helps now if we take the ego out of the viewpoint of sin and begin to see it as those original survival, instinctual programs. And so when we can see this human ego on display at any zoo, go to the Monkey Island in the zoo and you see territoriality, you see gangs, they hang together in groups and then fight over turf. There's always turf wars going on around the world. Then you see the exploitation and the subjugation of the weak. You see deception, you see lying, camouflage. And so all you see in today's headlines, the way that David Hawkins puts it, is the Monkey Island with a human expression. And so spiritual work, and why we're here on this channel, is really about overcoming all of these things and then being able to experience an entirely new quality of life, an increased quality of life. And so it's about overcoming selfishness, self-centeredness, and egocentricity, as David Hawkins puts it, in all of its various disguises. what are, quote unquote, the various disguises? Well, the compulsion to have, to own, to be successful or be the best, in the sense of not building, the old quote of there's two ways to have the biggest building, and one is to tear down all the other buildings, and the other way is to build your own as the biggest. And so there's different ways that success could be looked at, but this idea of being the best and wanting to dominate and to win, and all the things that we know as egocentricity. And so David Hawkins continues, how does one then begin to transcend the ego and begin to experience a new spiritual life, experience higher levels of happiness and freedom in your life, if you don't care about the spirituality part? But the question is, what can we do really from a practical viewpoint? And how does one begin to transcend this? And he puts it this way. He says, people say, quote, well, I'm interested in evolving spiritually. What can I do from a practical viewpoint? Because all what I've just described, what David Hawkins just described, can sound quite advanced and be like, well, yeah, what does this actually mean? And that's why we spend a lot of time in the wisdom of the ages. These are practical, simple, down to earth, easy ways that we can begin to apply these kinds of philosophies into our own lifestyles and begin to not only change our thoughts, but change our lives. But the compulsion to have, so actually, because of everything we just described, sounds quite advanced and quite theoretical and quite imposing to somebody who isn't familiar with this kind of work. Actually, this work becomes rather easy. And this is why I love spiritual work, because it's always a paradox. It seems one of those things that like you're always striving to get something or somewhere, and then the moment you release from that attachment to the striving, then that arrives somehow, or you arrive, and it's like, how was it so easy when I thought it had to be so difficult? And so this is the paradoxical nature of these kinds of things. So actually, the work becomes rather easy the more we practice, the more we arrive, he puts it. I didn't know he was going to say that, so good little side tangent there back to the words of Dr. David Hawkins. The more that we arrive, rather than striving, this was Wayne Dyer's philosophy, the understanding and the awareness of arriving versus striving. We want to be arriving, because if we're always striving, we'll never know how to be here and be where it is that we want to be. So when we can arrive at the feeling of, I knew this all along, when we're discovering these different spiritual awarenesses, of course, you'll find that, yeah, you did know it all along, but you want to know how to transform this feeling in your everyday life. So people say, how can I grow spiritually? Do I have to go somewhere? Do I have to get a guru? Or do I have to join some kind of meditation group? Do I have to recite mantras and, do 50-hour ohms and what, or what, And so David Hawkins goes, no, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to do that at all. While some of that may be perfectly fine and help along the process, but it's so simple that it is overlooked almost all the time, he says. It's a decision to be loving and kind towards all of life, most importantly, including your own. Because if you do not have something, then you cannot give it away. So if you do not have love and happiness within you, then it will be very difficult to give that away, and you'll actually constantly be looking for somewhere outside of yourself to get a hold and grasp on it. It's like the kitten that was chasing its tail to get a grasp because it learned in cat philosophy school. If you haven't heard the story, it's a great one. But the kitten learned in cat philosophy school that there's two most important things for a cat, and that number one is happiness, and number two, it is located in your tail. So it's in the alley chasing its tail, and the old alley cat says, what are you doing? And the kitten tells him this, and he says, that's funny. You think you're going to get this grasp and eternal lock on happiness. But he goes, I found, in my years in the alley, I wasn't as lucky to go to cat philosophy school, but he goes, you are right about those two things. The only difference is that I found if you go about your business and do what it is you know that you need to do and want to do, then it will follow you wherever you go. Love that story. The meaning is that you don't need to be seeking to grasp a firm hold on it somewhere outside of you when you can have it within you, and you can build it and create it through effort to have it with you, and it follows you wherever you go. And so this is what Dr. David Hawkins is saying about all this, spiritual philosophy about transcending the ego and the duality of it, is that people often think, you have to do all these different things. And it's so simple that it's overlooked all the time. It is this decision to be loving and kind towards all life, including your own, at all times, no matter what. And that is the ultimate challenge. That is the ultimate challenge for all of us, ladies and gentlemen. To be forgiving, he continues, to be gentle, to be that which is supportive of life. So that becomes not what we do, but eventually over time, through practice, it becomes actually who we are. You become that which supports life, supports all endeavors. It encourages those who need encouragement, and it becomes the energy of life itself. It becomes almost like the manifestation of the Divine Mother as well as the Divine Father, which is very interesting. The Tao talked about the Divine Mother. So it's the merging of the two, that which is nurturing and that which is also demanding of excellence. And so we must be this way with ourselves and attempt to attain this in our lives. And I tell you what, my journey and process so far in attempting this for myself has led to so much more joy and happiness and a release of the weight that so many of us feel all the time on our shoulders, this responsibility or this, this feeling that's the best way I can describe it. But when you switch from the weight of responsibility to creating an ability to respond, so you can respond with ability, the weight is removed, and you almost feel like Alan Watts puts it, you can go through life with some gusto battling it, or get like a sword fight. I think he was referring to fencing in that analogy. However, the point being clear, so let's continue. David Hawkins, in between now this section onto the next section entitled Starting on the Pathway of Non-Duality, says it's so simple that it is overlooked all the time. So this is the most important reminder from that bit. It is a decision to be loving and kind towards all of life, including our own, at all times, no matter what, to be forgiving, to be gentle, to be that which is supportive of life. That would be like a wonderful display quote to have posted conveniently multiple times, or maybe for like a phone background or something, and read that to yourself often. And it'll really probably change your direction. It'll definitely change your thoughts and your behavior. And that's the secret of the universe, ladies and gentlemen, is what you think about expands. And eventually is what you have to act upon. And that drives your pathway. But speaking of the pathway, David Hawkins was talking about his discovery that led him to becoming a spiritual teacher, and this path that he teaches called devotional non-duality. And so he described the ego and our journey and desire to transcend just that. But what is this concept and this idea of non-duality, ladies and gentlemen? Please leave your comments and thoughts on that below, because I'd love to hear that. But also, hope you got yourself a beverage. It is a beautiful day. I got the cold infusion tea because it is nice and warm here, 80 degrees. Hope it's wonderful and beautiful wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you are comfy, because this is a boom to spiritual wisdom. And now we're diving into starting on the pathway of non-duality. About a page and a half here, so not too much, but nevertheless, incredible. And so the pathway of non-duality, then, David Hawkins begins and continues, is the devotion to, as we were just discussing, these spiritual principles, which are the things like we were just talking about, the kindness and the, supportive of life, and the gentleness and the acceptance. And there's a lot that goes into it. And we will continue, and we have been, and we are discovering that always here on this channel. So if you're getting value, consider subscribing. Thank you so much. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. The devotion to spiritual principles. As you become devoted to spiritual principles, you're brought up face to face with the mind's propensity for either, and it's amazing when you can notice it in real time, for either good or bad, or evil, good or evil, liberal or conservative, or you're confronted constantly with the so-called polarities that we have in the duality of our reality, the dual nature of it. And we've gone a lot into duality as well in our Hermetics series that we've been doing on Wednesdays for quite some time. So if you're interested in the lost wisdom of the pharaohs and understanding more about the nature of reality and even the nature of duality, then check us out tomorrow. But we're constantly confronted with these polarities, and to reach a very advanced state of consciousness, it is then necessary for us to be able to go beyond or recognize and then, kung fu or transcend these kind of polarities, the so-called polarities of either or-ness. And so the ego would have you think that it's responsible for your survival. Ego says, if I wasn't so clever, if I didn't remind you to take your vitamins and all, you'd be deader than a mackerel. It's a weird way to put it. The downside of duality, then, is it creates this illusion that there's a separate I. Like, oh, I'm, never. You get the point. Let us continue. I'll let him explain it. The downside of duality that we exist within in life, in the way we think about it and experience things, and all of this, is that it creates this weird illusion. And if you've never thought about this is mind-blowing, that there's a separate I that is the cause of everything. Like, oh, I did this. Or that there's a personal I separate from the infinite oneness of totality, which is reality that we are a part of. This is a more abstract way to say that you are connected to God and God is everything. However, I like this way too. It goes that there is a personal I that's separate from the infinite oneness of the totality, which this is the illusion of the ego. The core of the ego is this self-centered point where I am separate, this is that, you are you, and I am me, and we are not connected, and nothing else is connected. And then we have, as Lao Tzu puts it in the Tao Te Ching, the world of the 10,000 things. So, which one assumes, we assume this I, this self-centered point, to be the cause of everything in our lives. And as long as you believe in causality, you are stuck in a duality of a this causing a that, rather than there being a oneness of a happening. But it'll make sense more the more that you contemplate on this, because, you know, I find it important there about the more and more contemplating. It was this is Wayne Dyer's first book, Your Erroneous Zones. But I was looking at the first little bit here, and there was a bit that I highlighted, and this is the perfect explanation, because I refer to this often in the Hermetic series, because it's about this constant contemplation, that we can actually come to truly understand these very dense and complex, but yet simple, paradoxically, topics and spiritual awarenesses and, you know, philosophical, whatever it be. And insight, Dr. Wayne Dyer says, must be repeated and repeated and repeated again. So when we get an insight, like when one sentence sparks it, and you're like, whoa, that means something significant. And then the next sentence like goes somewhere else, and you're like, dang it, that little bit was it. When you get these insights, they must be repeated and repeated and repeated again. Only then, as Hermes Trismegistus or Thoth put it, pure philosophy is spiritual striving through constant contemplation. This repeated again and again insight. Only then, when it is fully accepted and understood, do you begin to truly alter your behavior. You do slightly along the path, but it is for this reason that certain themes must be hammered at again and again, he says in the pages of this book, but I will say in the videos of this channel. Because it is only through that that we can come to understand and truly know and begin to change our lives. But with that being said, the core of the ego is the self-centered point, which one assumes, I'm going to go back over a little bit here, to be the cause of everything. As long as you believe in causality, we're stuck in duality of a this causing a that, and the pathway to enlightenment, ladies and gentlemen, through non-duality dissolves the opposites. So the pathway is through non-duality. The ego is so impressed by popularity, wanting to be right, vanity, pridefulness, and we have to begin to attempt to give up the vanity of wanting to be right. It's very difficult. Spirituality is really a way of being. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of being in the world. And people think of spirituality in terms of the ego's function of doingness rather than being. We're not human doings. We are human beings. And so it's not a doingness, however, it is a way of beingness in the world. It is a way of being with the world, in which one is in a constant state of appreciation and service. This not only comes to us from David Hawkins, it comes to us from every great spiritual philosophy that there is, including the lost wisdom of the pharaohs and Hermetics. It was simply put in the Hermetica that the purpose of life is to see that everything is creation, is Atum, God, and that we are a part of that, and that we are connected to everything, and then to love and appreciate that, and have an awe and a reverence for it, and then to tend to it and keep it and make it good. And that is it. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. But for some reason, we cannot figure that out. And that is the survival, instinctual programming that we have as human beings, as a species. That is the ego. And that is what we're talking about. And transcending the ego through this new spiritual pathway of non-duality. But really, it's just a spiritual understanding or philosophy. Now, with that being said, it's not a doingness, it's a beingness. To make rapid spiritual advancement, as David Hawkins puts it, or I would say just advancement on the quality of your day-to-day experiences in life through a new perspective, comes down to, what was that? If you want to be, it's very simple. I wish to see, so it's very, I was almost going to skip ahead there, but let's just go back. It is a way of being in the world in which one is in a constant state of appreciation and service, tending to it, appreciating, and knowing that you are connected to it. And so, to become benign, to be cordial, to be loving towards all things, he says, if I had not felt loving towards that rattlesnake, which apparently we will talk about in chapter 5, if we'll make it there. But we will be continuing this in the future on this channel as a series, so do not worry, ladies and gentlemen. We will be getting some fantastic classic teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment from Dr. David R. Hawkins and my own personal ramblings, and hopefully you get value, ladies and gentlemen. So, it's a way of, he asked the question, why should we be in this state of appreciation and service? And it is because we become discerning of the beauty of existence. And so he would never have lived, he says, if I had not felt this way and had this love towards the rattlesnake he encountered with in the stories in chapter 5, he says, I would never have lived long enough to be able to even tell us this tale and to write this book. And so with that example, the respect for all that exists, which we are a part of, so the ants and, even the spiders, we must have a reverence for all of creation, including, I said this a couple of days ago, we need to give the mineral kingdom more respect because it does have a very low form of consciousness, and it's getting stepped on all the time, ladies and gentlemen, so we got to give it some more respect. Now, with that being said, this lovingness towards and this reverence towards all of reality can sometimes, even in his case, save our lives. But truly, he says, spiritual people are willing to see, and this is a real key to experience more happiness in life, you need to have a willingness to see the intrinsic beauty of all things, of all of existence, because, the media and a lot of what we see, a lot of what we're told to think about reality is an extremely negative viewpoint. And I've learned in my life that you will find what you look for in abundance, not just a little bit. You'll get a ton of whatever it is that you want to see in the world, in life, anywhere. And so be very careful. Remember, secret of the universe, what you think about expands, thoughts are things. So be very careful with what it is that you are expecting to see and what it is that, you'll find what you look for. So if you're looking for negativity in the world, you will find it, heaps of it. If you're looking for love and positivity and amazing, wonderful things, then you will find heaps of those as well. So be very diligent, dedicated to this willingness, as he puts it, to see the intrinsic beauty of everything, to be benign and to be unconditional loving towards all things at all times. Now, I know these are tall tasks, so let's start with 1%. If we could do a 1% of this part of the time, And so he continues, if you want to become spiritually evolved, it's very simple. Let's say the ideal is, I wish to see the world the way it is. And the only way to see it the way it is to decide for yourself to be loving towards all, no matter what. This even means the terrible things, and this can be a great contradiction and confusion. And this was one of the biggest questions to all the great gurus and spiritual teachers throughout the ages. How do we deal with all of the terrible things we see in the world while having this unconditional lovingness towards all of it? Well, I still haven't found the answer to that question, but I prefer to choose the more peaceful, happy path than the, stressed, angry at the world kind of path. Now, to be respectful and loving towards all that exists, to be committed, David Hawkins continues, to life in all its expressions, and to discern the beauty and perfection of all that exists is a practice, and it is a lifestyle. It is a way of us of being in the world. So as I said before, it is not a doingness, it's a beingness. To make rapid spiritual advancements, we must make a decision to be that which fulfills the potential of life and to witness its beauty and perfection in all of its expressions. Ladies and gentlemen. Now let me go through this. I could leave it there because that was beautiful. Let me go through this last bit and see what we get about the ego here. The ego, David Hawkins continues, sees everything in terms of cause. This is where it comes back to causality. Everything is going from an imperfection to perfection, from incomplete to complete. With spiritual vision, you begin to see everything is going from perfection to perfection. It was never, if you remove our human judgments, our silly human judgments that we think we can judge all of reality. It's like when we can remove that, we can see that everything is what it was. It is what it is. This flower is no better than that one. They're flowers, so to speak. And so with this kind of new vision, we can begin to see things instead of going from, bad to good or vice versa. We see that they just are going from perfection to perfection, and everything is moving. David Hawkins continues. Everything is, everything is moving from perfection, and everything is already complete also at the moment. So if you feel like you're an incomplete person, that is incorrect. You are whole and complete in every moment. Do not forget that and say it to yourself often. I am whole and complete in each moment, and I need not chase after anything in order to appreciate my life. Now, good mantra there. You are whole and complete in each moment and need not chase after anything in order to feel complete in your life. Now, this is a perfect cut on the back of my hand. That's a weird way to look at it. Somebody would call you crazy. And then it'll get to be a perfect healing. And then it'll leave a perfect scar. And it'll be just fine. Everything is being perfectly what it's destined to be and fulfilling its potential. See, this is a new perspective on life. It's a spiritual perspective. This is why I love spiritual philosophy. And this is why we're here. So instead of causality, this caused that, what we begin to see more is a continuous, a oneness. What he calls here is an emergence. The world is not a world of cause at all, he says. We live in a world of emergence. Everything, every instant has a certain potentiality. Now, this connects with manifesting and creating, but that's a different subject. So we begin to see that things are not happening due to causality, not due to a personal self. We see the emergence of potentiality into actuality. And there was actually Matt Belair, like 6 or 7 years ago, did a 3-hour interview with he was like a mathematician and a quantum physicist. This guy was like, I mean, some of the things he would say, you just go right over your head. You'd have no clue what he was, but he got down to the point, describing very scientifically, that everything in reality has a certain level of like a certain level of quantifiable potentiality through certain mathematical processes, and that you can actually come up with the possible futures of certain things based on their level of potentiality. And this is described sometimes in certain philosophies as future pull. But with that being said, we can see that things are not happening to what we so often think of when we plainly look at the world with a viewpoint of duality and causality. We see this emergence of potentiality into actuality. A lot of alities going on here, so don't worry. We're just having fun in the process. The fulfillment as the rose blooms and becomes a full rose. The potential that is in a tomato seed, like you can't cut open a tomato seed and find red tomatoes inside. It's just this brown dust. But in this dust is the potentiality for the manifestation of what is currently a non-existent, well, actually for me is an existent tomato plants with tomatoes out there. But, when you just have the seed, the plant doesn't exist yet. And so this is a different topic. Anyways, using that example, nothing is causing it and nothing is forcing it. So this goes back to that striving rather than arriving that we were talking about in the beginning. For the forcing, if we try to tug at the roots of the tomatoes when they're just sprouting, boom, ripped them out, process destroyed, need to start again and allow, rather than forcing, or arrive and be there rather than striving, so it can actually lead to its greatest possible potentiality given the right circumstances. And so the fulfillment as the rose blooms, back to what David Hawkins is saying here, becomes a full rose. Nothing is causing it, nothing is forcing it, and nothing is even deciding it. The potentiality to open fully, open its petals, already resides within the rose every instant of its entire life cycle. And this is a very metaphysical little analogy. I mean, you could look at every bit of nature and you could get very deep. And it's very interesting that this potentiality is within everything at all times, and it is always perfect, regardless of the part of the process that it is in currently, because that would be a judgment from a singular perspective in time and space from, your own compared. So anyways, when you can zoom out of time, out of your human judgments, ego characteristics, and just see the non-duality and the oneness, then we can really begin to do what I was saying earlier, is to appreciate all of reality and then really begin to enjoy these things that we previously just took for granted. Oh, tomato plants. I don't even like tomatoes. It's like, that's not the point. This is the most funny thing about all this, is you can really, like, when you change the way you look at things through this new awareness, which is our whole process here, like I will keep saying forever, you just entirely change what you see. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at, even though they would be the same tomato plant to somebody else, entirely different with this new perspective. And it just makes it that much more wonderful, in my opinion. Let me know what you think about that. But so I love how he's put it there with the rose petals, and actually the potentiality of opening is within it at all times, every instant. And so there you transform our experience, your experience of life and the world and reality by seeing that everything is perfect every instant. David Hawkins says, people ask me, how can you improve this world? And he goes, I tell them not to bother. Don't bother trying to improve it. This world is perfect the way it is. There's no point in trying to improve the world because the world you see, it doesn't even exist. You've got your perspective, ladies and gentlemen. Don't you just want to be happy? I mean, but the way David Hawkins puts it is if the purpose of the world is karmic benefit and the evolution of consciousness, then this world is perfect as it is. This is a very high spiritual understanding. I would say this is a very difficult attainment of a perspective to get to because of the type of world that we do live in. But this is nevertheless the underlying reality, in my opinion, as well as Dr. David R. Hawkins, ladies and gentlemen, which is probably a lot more valuable than mine. But if the purpose of this world, this is important to remember, is karmic benefit and to increase the consciousness and produce the evolution of consciousness, because remember, it is through struggles that we create the greatest innovations and the things that we need to do to evolve and go beyond those struggles so we don't deal with them again. This is evolution. This is the evolution of consciousness. And so he goes, if this is the purpose of this world and this reality is karmic benefit and the evolution of consciousness, then it is perfect the way it is, because there is a lot of things that we are still trying to learn from and transcend, including transcending the ego and moving from the ego to service, ladies and gentlemen. And that is a very high spiritual understanding, as David Hawkins puts it, but as Diamond puts it, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a boon to knowledge and a boon to wisdom, and the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. Classic teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment. Ladies and gentlemen, that was fantastic. Hope you got value. And thank you so much for being here. I love and appreciate each and every one of you who spends time here with me, with all the wonderful authors and poets and mystics and philosophers and even sage gods. But with that being said, thanks again. Be sure to expand the description. You can find a link to the book so you can get it for yourself, so you can put it on your shelf, so you can follow along in the future in the series, or you can reference for yourself anytime you need a boost in, this kind of understanding, or just to make yourself feel a little better. Sometimes there's a lot of good stuff in all of these books that we've gone through on this channel, ladies and gentlemen. And also be sure to, if you like some art, some landscape paintings, as you can see in the background there, you can check out my Etsy shop, which is linked below, as well as also a link to C60 Purple Power, the most powerful antioxidant known to man. Give yourself the gift of health. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and a greater understanding of the nature of reality. And so through that awareness, we can hopefully increase the quality of our lives. And remember that also there is no way to happiness and enlightenment. It is the way. So if we can begin to bring it to life, then all the things we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll be happy when I get there and have this much, that becomes irrelevant, because then we are there, and then the journey is wonderful, hopefully. ladies and gentlemen. Once again, love and appreciate each and every one of you. And until tomorrow we'll be going back into the Hermetica. No, the Hermetics. Which one is it? Corpus Hermeticum, the Divine Pymander. Original manuscript, Hermes Trismegistus. And let's see what the chapter is going to be tomorrow. Oh, yeah, we are continuing the key, which is very deep. I won't even get into it. It's very deep, but look forward to seeing you there tomorrow on Wednesday, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much once again. And until tomorrow, be the change you want to see. Be the example you want to set.